Hello everyone, welcome to the Geoecologist. I am Dr. Krishnanand and you have been watching my videos on various topics of geography, environment and research methodology on my channel, The Geoecologist. So if you are new to this channel, consider subscribing our channel because we are going to complete each and every topic related to geography. Now in today's session on settlement geography, we are going to learn about the classification of settlements, where we'll be talking about the various types of settlements across the world and India. So before we go ahead, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and do share the videos with others as well. So now let's discuss about the classification of settlements. Now when we say classification of settlements, first important thing here to understand is that in the last lecture we learnt about the factors that control or determine these kind of settlement patterns, right? So if you want to understand these classification of settlements, you must link it with the factors of these settlements which are important, right? So settlements vary in size and in type, that we already know, and they range from a hamlet to metropolitan cities. Remember the hierarchy, right? We talked about in the previous lectures also. So with size, the economic character and the social structure. Now remember these two phrases, economic character and social structure of settlements changes. It means it is a variable, right? So what changes is social structure and also economic characteristic as it grows, right? So ecology and technology is something which we need to take care when we are talking about the various classification of settlement. So for instance, settlements could be small and sparsely placed. They may also be large and closely spaced, right? At the same time. So if you observe further points, that sparsely located small settlements, which we know by the name of isolated settlements, hamlets, villages, these are specializing more in agriculture, primary activities, right? In economic geography also we looked at it. And on the other hand, there are fewer but larger settlements, megapolis, metropolis, right? Urban settlements, which are specialized settlement in terms of work culture, in terms of social structure, economy, ecology, everything, right? So what you observe, they specialize in tertiary or secondary activities and quinary activities, right? So this is a segregation that happens when settlement grows from a point location and it starts to overlap the various other areas around it. So what happens? There is a segregation, there is a uniqueness, there is an areal differentiation that is created at the same time. So what you observe here, that there is a dichotomy between these settlements, right? Urban settlements and rural settlements. The first and the major dichotomy that you can see existing across the world, right? So we have learned about the evolution of settlements. If you have not watched the video, you can watch it in the playlist on evolution of the settlements, how the hunter and gatherer to the rural economy to the surplus economy and gradually rise of urban settlements happened. And in today's world we have agglomeration of settlements, conurbations, right? Megalopolis. So what you observe, there is a dichotomy between rural and urban. There is a divide that we always look into. And in lectures to come, we'll be also talking about rural-urban divide, rural-urban continuum, right? And several other topics, for example, rural-urban fringe as well, right? So what you observe, there is a dichotomous relationship that we keep observing across the space. So it's important to learn the classification of the settlements. Now, the important point here is settlements are primarily classified on the basis of, again, same factors that we talked about, site and situation factors, that is locational attributes, patterns across the world, their size, housing density, and most important is functional classification of settlements, the functions that is attributed to a particular settlement that it specializes in. So how do we learn about it? This is the flow diagram which will help us to get an overview, right? So if you observe in this flow diagram, settlements are temporary kinds and permanent kinds, right? So what is a temporary settlement or temporary shelter? Refugee camps, picnic camps, disaster relief camps and several others which are very short-lived or which are very purposeful in context to a particular disaster maybe or a particular situation, right? So what you observe, these are temporary nature. But we're talking more about permanent settlements here when we say settlement geography, right? Because that is where their nature are defined. They are different from one another in terms of their characteristics, right? So rural settlements and urban settlements are the major classes. Under rural, you can see isolated hamlets, villages, small market towns, right? But what about urban centers? These are larger towns, cities, megalopolis, which we say conurbations, right? So what we observe is these kind of classifications are there, and this is the overview of a settlement structure, or you say settlement hierarchy across the globe. Right? So majority of inhabitants in developing countries are more concentrated in the rural living conditions, while developed countries, what we observe, that more of them are concentrated in urban areas. So what is the transformation happening? From rural to urban is where we are heading towards, right? So that is where we look into that how rural areas are also now looking towards urbanization. Gradually the world is changing, right? So these are the important debates and dichotomies that we need to take care when we are looking into the classification of settlements. Now let's understand that what are these factors and how to look into the conditions responsible for having different types of rural settlements. For example, physical features, cultural and ethnic features, security factors, and in detail we already talked about all these factors in the previous lecture if you have seen the factors for settlements. So you observe physical features like terrain, altitude, climate, availability of water, then you have social structure, caste and religion in ethnic and cultural factors, and then defense against the thefts and robberies and attacks, that is security factors. Right? Then further, if you observe, rural settlements in Indian context especially will have these kind of settlements: clustered, agglomerated or nucleated we say. Then what we have is semi-clustered or fragmented settlements. Then we have hamlets. Then you have dispersed or isolated settlements. Right? This is the same settlement hierarchy that we have been learning from the nature and scope of settlement geography till now. So what you observe further, this is one of the table which you can use for yourself when you want to look into the various aspects of nucleated or types of nucleated settlements, semi-nucleated or dispersed, right? So you observe rectangular to this amorphous, to horseshoe shape to the checkerboard, to dispersed to this, that is sprinkled or no pattern, which is random pattern. So we can observe that there are various kinds of pattern, various kinds of shape, spatial distribution of these settlements which account for their uniqueness or their classification at the same time that we learn. So let's understand in more simple ways, how does it look on the space? So this is the diagram which you can use here. This is where the dispersed kind of pattern you will find. This is where nucleation happens or agglomeration happens on these nodal points, or you can see along the road or highways you'll have linear, along the railway lines, along the water bodies you'll have linear settlements, and then you have certain isolated settlements as well in many hilly areas or plateau areas or forested areas, right? So this is how we look into the various kinds of rural settlements. Then further, let's understand the types of settlements on the basis of site and location specifically now. Right? So if you observe, we talked about locational factor, site factor, situational factor in the previous lecture also. So what you have, the bridging point settlement, dry point settlement, nodal point settlement. If you observe, these are the diagrams which you can clearly see, right? Where a river was shallow, you'll find bridging point here. Dry point settlements on the top of the hills, not near the river. And then there is nodal point settlements, where is a meeting point or node or confluence of river. Remember we talked about Dev Prayag's example. Then further, you observe defensive kinds of settlements, wet point settlements, and also aspect based settlements, right? So this is all we have already learned in the factors lecture as well, right? So these are based on the site or location kind of settlement. Then what we observe is types of settlements or classification of settlement on the basis of their pattern. Now this is what we look at as spatial pattern. Which kind of pattern do they create on the space, on the map, right? So topography and terrain becomes very important, right? Linear, circular, square, fan, net, or you say reticulum or star, that is radial kind of pattern, arrow kind of pattern, terrace pattern. Several such patterns exist across the settlements, that is around the world, if you can find out, right? So what you observe, one of the diagrams you can observe here, linear pattern, cross shape, star shape, T shape, circular, double pattern. This is how they look, right? So you can practice drawing these kind of diagrams when you're talking about the settlement patterns across the world, right? Then further, if you observe types of settlements on the basis of their functions, very important, because many towns or cities, or for that matter particular settlements, are specialized in particular functions. For example, religious, defensive, commercial, industrial, administrative, transport and distribution, tourist, cultural and military centers, right? So this is specialized in their functions, right? So you can observe this particular settlement functions flow diagram here, where function of a settlement relates to its economic and social development. So tourist resort, residential, administrative, commercial, route center, manufacturing, port, cultural and religious centers, market towns, mining towns, right? And you can have several such examples from world and India, right? So this is what? This is functional classification of settlement. And in details, in lectures to come, we'll be also talking about various people like Ashok Mitra and others who gave functional classification and other classification of the urban centers, cities and towns in India as well, right? So what you observe, types of settlement in next category is on the basis of spacing. So how much space is there in between two houses or two settlements? That is what we look into when we say spacing. Is it congested or is it spaced out? So we have compact or congested, or we say nucleated settlements, for example. So what do you observe? Generally they develop near a railway station, a well, a quarry or industrial site, a river valley, fertile plains, where what you have is space is less but people are more, and this is a compacted settlement, right? So what you observe here, inhabitants are closely tied and share common occupations. That is very important to understand. So how does it look? It looks something like this if you look into the aerial photograph, right? So this is a compact, or we say nucleated settlement. Then if you observe the scattered or the spaced out or the dispersed settlement, it clearly is evident that one unit is away from the other unit. These are so much of spaced out. There is so much of space in between them. And you find out mostly on hilly terrain, forested areas, plateau areas, right? Where you will find these kind of terrain. They dominate and they did not create a unique space where everybody could accommodate. They can have a common space to live. So what happens? They are separated out. They are scattered in the space, right? So this is on the basis of spacing that we observe. And further, if you observe that what is the way forward when we look into the types of classifications of these settlements, why is it important to understand? Because in conclusion, you'll observe that sustainable development goals, especially the goal number 11, sustainable cities and communities. This is very important for today's world and times to come. So what happens? After going through this settlement classification, we must understand and we could conclude that study of settlements have been of most significant themes in human geography, right? So population and settlement geography is one of the core themes in human geography, and geographers study rural settlement as a unit. Why? Because it serves very important functions, right? It serves as a link between the dwellers and the physical environment. So if you have to really study human geography, relationship between man and environment that we keep talking about, it's very important to understand this rural niche, right? The rural milieu that is created. So physical, social, economic, cultural and many more factors are responsible for various types and patterns of these rural settlements. And in lectures to come, we'll be also talking on morphology of rural settlements separately. There we discuss the details, right? And what you observe, for example, physical factors influence the type and spacing of dwellings. Ethnic and cultural factors like caste, community, ethnicity and religion lead to social segregation. So we have natural factors and cultural factors, and accordingly their influences, right? So the future is, or the way forward is what? In present day, geographers have put emphasis on rural settlement study as well as their transformation into urban settlement. For example, land use change, land cover change, agriculture, forestry, conservation of environment, rural employment, energy, housing, recreation, health and education. And the new thing that is always around us is ecotourism. Not simply tourism, but ecologically sensitive tourism. And many times it has been asked in various competitive examinations as well. So you observe, to relate it with sustainable development goals, the various kinds of settlements, their factors and several integration, right? We understand these concepts are very important for understanding the overview of settlement geography. So not just factors and not just types, but factors and types put together to be getting an overview, or we say summary of understanding, is very important for learning settlement geography. So now, when we have learnt in details about the various types of settlements across the world in India, we will be talking more on different other aspects of settlement geography in the lectures to come. So please check the playlist, and also don't forget to share the videos with others, and do subscribe to our channel for the upcoming videos. So all the best wishes. Take care.